The silence was the worst part. Not the empty champagne flutes or the polished shoes shifting uncomfortably on marble floors. Not even the whispered conversations that died the moment he stepped into the light. It was the silence that stretched like a chasm between who he thought he was and who this room decided he could never be. Under the crystal chandeliers of Connecticut's most exclusive country club, a man in a borrowed suit stood on a stage where dreams came to die. The auctioneer's voice had grown smaller with each failed attempt. $500, 300, 200. The numbers fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of embarrassment that would spread far beyond this gilded room. But sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person who destroys your world is the same one who offers to rebuild it. And sometimes a single raised hand can change the trajectory of two lives forever. In small towns, secrets have long memories. In boardrooms, mercy is a luxury few can afford. Tonight, both worlds were about to collide. The autumn air in Millbrook, Connecticut carried the scent of burning leaves and the promise of winter. Marcus Thompson adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror of his 15-year-old Honda Civic, wondering for the 100th time how he'd let his 12-year-old daughter talk him into this. "You have to go, Dad," Emma had said just 3 days ago, waving the charity auction flyer like a battle flag. "It's for my school, and you always say we should support the community." Now, standing outside the Millbrook Country Club in his one good suit, the same navy blue one he'd worn to job interviews and parent-teacher conferences, Marcus felt like a fraud. The parking lot was filled with BMWs, Mercedes, and the occasional Tesla. His Honda looked like a lost tourist. The country club's colonial facade glowed with warm light, and through the tall windows, he could see elegantly dressed people mingling with champagne glasses. Marcus had rewired the electrical system in this very building 2 years ago, crawling through dusty crawl spaces and dealing with decades-old wiring. Tonight, he was supposed to walk through the front door as an equal. "Just get through it," he muttered to himself, checking his watch. 7:00 p.m. sharp. Emma was staying with her best friend Sarah for the night, but not before giving him a pep talk that would make a football coach proud. "Remember, Dad, you're amazing. You fixed Mrs. Patterson's entire house after that storm. You volunteer at the fire department. You make the best pancakes in Connecticut." She'd straightened his tie with the seriousness of a 12-year-old who'd appointed herself his personal cheerleader. "And if some rich lady bids on you, maybe she'll take us to Disney World." The memory made him smile as he walked toward the entrance, but the smile faded when he caught his reflection in the glass doors. 47 years old, graying at the temples, hands that no amount of scrubbing could completely clean of the honest dirt that came with his trade. What was he doing here inside? The country club had been transformed into something from a magazine. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in white linens. A jazz quartet played softly in the corner, and servers in crisp uniforms moved through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than Marcus's grocery budget for a week. He accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. When in Rome, he figured, and tried to blend into the background. The other bachelors were easy to spot. They clustered near the bar, laughing too loudly, their confidence radiating like expensive cologne. Dr. Richard Hartwell, the plastic surgeon with the perfect smile and perfectly capped teeth. James Morrison, who owned half the commercial real estate in Hartford. Even Craig Bennett, the high school football coach, looked comfortable in his tuxedo. Marcus took a sip of champagne and immediately regretted it. Too dry, too expensive, too much like everything else in this room that reminded him he didn't belong. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats, we'll begin shortly." The voice came from the stage, smooth and professional. Marcus turned toward the speaker and felt his breath catch. The woman at the microphone was stunning, but not in the obvious way of the other society wives scattered throughout the room. She was probably in her early 50s, with silver-streaked auburn hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. Her black evening gown was simple but clearly expensive, and she moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having to wonder if she belonged somewhere. Good evening, everyone. I'm Victoria Sterling, and I'll be your host for tonight's Bachelor Auction benefiting Millbrook Elementary School. Victoria Sterling. Marcus knew the name. Everyone in Connecticut did. Tech entrepreneur, CEO of Sterling Innovation, one of the few self-made female billionaires on the East Coast. What was she doing hosting a small-town charity auction? Before we begin, Victoria continued, her voice carrying easily through the room without seeming to strain, I want to remind everyone that tonight is about more than just a fun evening. It's about investing in our children's future, supporting our local community, and proving that Millbrook knows how to come together for a good cause. Applause rippled through the crowd. Marcus found himself clapping along, caught up in the sincerity in her voice. When she smiled, it transformed her entire face, making her seem both more approachable and more radiant. Now let's meet our brave bachelors who volunteered their time for this worthy cause. The auction began with Dr. Hartwell, who practically strutted across the stage. The bidding was immediate and fierce, 3 different women competing until the final bid reached $2,500. James Morrison followed, his real estate connections ensuring a bidding war that topped $3,000. Marcus watched from the wings, his palms growing sweaty. Each bachelor before him had received enthusiastic applause, competitive bidding, and walked off the stage with a date secured and their dignity intact. The crowd was warmed up, wallets were open, and the evening was hitting its stride. Our next bachelor, Victoria announced, consulting her notes, is Marcus Thompson. Marcus is a licensed electrician and small business owner here in Millbrook. He's also a volunteer firefighter and a devoted single father to his daughter Emma. The applause was polite as Marcus walked onto the stage, but he could feel the shift in the room's energy. Where Dr. Hartwell had commanded attention, Marcus simply asked for patience. His suit was nice enough, but it wasn't tailored. His smile was genuine, but it wasn't practiced. He represented something different in this room full of polish and privilege. He represented work. Marcus, Victoria said, her voice warm as she joined him, center stage. Tell us a little about yourself. He leaned toward the microphone, feedback squealing briefly before he found the right distance. Well, I've lived in Millbrook my whole life. I love this town. Love raising my daughter here. I started my electrical business about 10 years ago, and I guess I just try to help people when I can. It wasn't the smooth, practiced speech the other bachelors had delivered. It was honest, humble, and real. Victoria nodded encouragingly, and for a moment, Marcus felt like maybe this wouldn't be a disaster. Do I hear an opening bid of $500? Victoria asked, scanning the crowd with professional confidence. Silence. Marcus kept his smile fixed, but his stomach started to sink. He could see people looking at their programs, checking their phones, whispering to their companions. The energy that had been so electric for the previous bachelors seemed to have evaporated. Perhaps we could start at $300. Victoria tried, her voice still bright but with a slight edge that suggested she was as surprised as anyone. More silence. Marcus felt heat creeping up his neck. In the audience, he could see the same women who had bid enthusiastically on Dr. Hartwell now studying their manicures with sudden fascination. $200. Victoria's voice had lost some of its professional polish, becoming more human, more concerned. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable, then painful. Marcus felt every second like a physical weight. This was his nightmare scenario, the one that had kept him awake for the past 3 nights. But it was worse than he'd imagined, because it wasn't just happening to him. It was happening in front of Victoria Sterling, a woman who clearly knew how to command a room and was now watching her perfectly orchestrated event hit an unexpected snag. He was about to step toward the microphone, to make some self-deprecating joke that would let everyone off the hook, when something remarkable happened. Victoria Sterling set down her notes, picked up a paddle from the podium, and raised it high. $10,000. The number hit the room like a thunderclap. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the jazz quartet seemed to miss a note. Marcus stared at her, certain he'd misheard. Victoria met his gaze steadily, her paddle still raised, her expression calm but determined. "I have $10,000 from Ms. Sterling," the auctioneer's assistant announced, his voice cracking slightly with surprise. "Do I hear any other bids?" The silence that followed was different from before, where the previous quiet had been dismissive. This was stunned. Marcus could practically hear the mental calculations happening throughout the room. $10,000 was more than the previous 3 winning bids combined. It was a statement, a rescue, and a mystery all wrapped up in one elegant gesture. Going once, going twice, sold to Miss Sterling for $10,000. The applause that followed was uncertain, scattered, more polite than enthusiastic. Marcus walked off the stage in a daze, his mind reeling. Why would Victoria Sterling, a woman who could probably buy and sell everyone in this room, bid $10,000 on a small-town electrician she'd never met as the auction continued with the remaining bachelors? Marcus found himself watching her from across the room. She had returned to her role as host with seamless professionalism, but something had shifted. The smile was still there, the poise intact, but there was a new energy about her, as if she'd surprised herself as much as everyone else. When the evening finally wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Marcus found himself standing awkwardly by the coat check, uncertain of the protocol. Did he approach her? Wait for her to approach him? Pretend the whole thing had been a dream? "Marcus." He turned to find Victoria Sterling walking toward him, having exchanged her hosting smile for something more genuine and infinitely more complicated. "Ms. Sterling, thank you." "That was incredibly generous. But you didn't have to." "Victoria," she interrupted gently. "And you're right. I didn't have to. I wanted to." They stood there for a moment, 2 people from completely different worlds, connected by a gesture that neither fully understood yet. "So," Marcus said finally, "I guess I owe you a date." Her smile was soft, almost shy. "I guess you do." 3 days later, Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror, second-guessing every decision he'd made in the past 48 hours. Victoria had called, personally, not through an assistant, and suggested lunch at Giuseppe's, a small Italian restaurant in the heart of Millbrook's historic district. It was casual, she'd said. No pressure. Easy for her to say. She hadn't spent the last 3 days fielding calls from Emma's friends' mothers, all dying to know the details of his date with the billionaire. The Millbrook gossip network was more efficient than the internet, and by Sunday morning, half the town seemed to know about the auction. "It's not actually a date," he'd told Emma over breakfast. "It's more like a business meeting, a thank you lunch." Emma had rolled her eyes with the devastating accuracy that only 12-year-olds could achieve. "Dad, she bid $10,000 on you. That's not business meeting money. That's I think you're cute money." Now adjusting his collar for the 3rd time. Marcus wondered if his daughter might be right. Not about the cute part. He was realistic about his place in the world, but about the significance of the gesture. $10,000 was a lot of money, even for a billionaire. It meant something, even if he couldn't figure out what. Giuseppe's was exactly the kind of place Marcus felt comfortable family-owned, unpretentious, with red checkered tablecloths and the smell of garlic and basil thick in the air. He arrived 5 minutes early, a habit ingrained by years of client meetings, and was surprised to find Victoria already seated at a corner table. She looked different in daylight, more human somehow. Gone was the elegant evening gown, replaced by dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was studying the menu with the kind of focus most people reserve for tax documents. "I hope you don't mind," she said as he approached the table, "but I took the liberty of ordering wine. The Chianti here is excellent." "That's fine, thank you." Marcus settled into his chair, trying to reconcile this woman with the commanding presence he'd seen on stage 3 nights ago. Have you been here before? A few times, she smiled, and there was something wistful in it. My father used to bring me here when I was young, back when it was just Giuseppe and his wife Maria running the whole place. Giuseppe's son Tony runs it now, Marcus said. I rewired their kitchen about 5 years ago. Good people. You seem to know everyone in town. Small town electrician. I've been in half the houses in Millbrook at one point or another. He accepted the wine glass she offered, surprised by how natural this felt. Usually crawling through their basements or attics, they ordered lasagna for him, chicken parmigiana for her, and fell into the kind of conversation that surprised them both with its ease. Victoria asked about his business, and Marcus found himself talking about the satisfaction of solving problems, of bringing light to dark places, of being the guy people called when things went wrong. There's something honest about electrical work, he said, warming to the subject. Either the light turns on or it doesn't. Either the circuit works or it doesn't. No gray areas, no politics, just function and reliability. That must be refreshing, Victoria said. Most of my world is gray areas. So technology, among other things. She took a sip of wine, seeming to choose her words carefully. I've built a career on seeing possibilities others miss, on betting on futures that don't exist yet. It's exciting, but it can also be isolating. Marcus was about to respond when something shifted in her expression. She was staring at him with a new intensity, as if she were seeing him clearly for the first time. Marcus, she said slowly, did you ever work at electronics, plus the old store on Main Street? The question caught him off guard. Electronics Plus. That was, God, that was 20 years ago. Maybe more. I was just out of trade school, working part-time while I got my certification. Why? Victoria's hand had moved to cover her mouth, and her eyes were wide with something that looked like recognition mixed with disbelief. You probably don't remember, she said quietly, but there was a girl who used to come in there. College age, always asking questions about computers and circuits. She had this old laptop that kept breaking down. And you... The memory hit Marcus like a physical force. A young woman, probably early 20s, with the same auburn hair and determined eyes. She'd been trying to nurse an ancient laptop through her senior year of college, and Marcus had spent hours helping her understand the basics of computer repair. Victoria, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. You spent 3 Saturday afternoons teaching me how to troubleshoot hardware problems. You wouldn't let me pay you. Said it was just part of the service. That laptop got me through my senior thesis, through my first job applications, through the early days of my first startup. Marcus sat back in his chair, stunned. The girl from Electronics Plus had been smart, ambitious, asking questions that showed she understood technology in ways that impressed even the engineers who occasionally came into the store. But she'd also been clearly struggling financially, wearing the same clothes week after week, always asking about the cheapest options. You disappeared, he said. One week you were there. The next week you weren't. I got a job offer in California, a tiny startup that needed someone who could understand both the technical and business sides of software development. I moved out there with $500 in my pocket and a laptop that still worked because of what you taught me. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of 20 years and the strange mathematics of fate. The successful billionaire sitting across from him was the same young woman he'd helped all those years ago, when kindness had been as natural as breathing, and the future had been an unwritten page. So the auction, Marcus began. The auction was me recognizing someone who changed my life without even knowing it, Victoria finished. When I saw you on that stage, when no one was bidding, I felt like I was watching the town dismiss the very person who'd helped create everything I'd become. Their food arrived, but neither of them seemed interested in eating. The revelation had shifted something fundamental between them, transforming what had been a mysterious gesture into something deeper and more complex. I can't believe you remembered, Marcus said finally. I remember everything about those afternoons, Victoria replied. The way you explained things without making me feel stupid. How you'd come in on your day off to check on my laptop. The day you gave me that old multimeter and said every woman should know how to troubleshoot her own circuits. Marcus laughed, the sound surprising him. I still believe that. I still have it, Victoria said. The multimeter. It's on my desk at the office. They finally began to eat, but the conversation continued to flow around the shared memory. Victoria told him about the early days in Silicon Valley, the 18-hour days, the failed startups that had led to the successful ones. Marcus talked about building his business, about the challenges of single parenthood, about the satisfaction of being needed in a community that had watched him grow up. What happened to Emma's mother? Victoria asked gently, and Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always accompanied thoughts of Sarah. Cancer, he said simply. 5 years ago. She was diagnosed when Emma was 7, gone within 8 months. It was the hardest thing we've ever been through. I'm sorry, Victoria said, and the sincerity in her voice made it clear she understood loss, even if she didn't share the details. What about you? Marcus asked. Ever married? Once? Briefly? To a man who was more interested in my portfolio than my personality? She smiled ruefully. Turns out being successful doesn't automatically make you a good judge of character. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself forgetting about the difference in their circumstances. Victoria was easy to talk to, quick to laugh, and genuinely interested in his life and work. When she asked about Emma, her questions were specific and thoughtful, not the polite inquiries of someone making conversation. She sounds remarkable, Victoria said after Marcus had shared a story about Emma's latest science project. You've raised an incredible daughter. She's raised me as much as I've raised her, Marcus admitted. Especially after Sarah died, Emma kept me grounded, kept me focused on what mattered. Would you like to bring her to dinner sometime? Victoria asked. I'd love to meet her properly. The invitation surprised Marcus, but what surprised him more was how much he wanted to say yes. This lunch had revealed layers to Victoria Sterling that had nothing to do with her wealth or success. She was the girl from Electronics Plus, grown up and transformed, but still carrying the same curiosity and determination that had impressed him 20 years ago. She'd like that, he said. Fair warning, though, she's going to ask you a million questions about everything from your business to your favorite ice cream flavor. I'm looking forward to it, Victoria said, and Marcus could tell she meant it. As they prepared to leave, Victoria reached for the check, but Marcus was faster. I've got this, he said. Marcus, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He looked at her seriously. 20 years ago, a young woman taught me that kindness creates ripples we can't always see. Today, I'm having lunch with the proof of that. The least I can do is buy you a meal. Victoria's smile was radiant. In that case, thank you. Outside the restaurant, they lingered on the sidewalk, neither quite ready to end the afternoon. The October air was crisp, and the maple trees lining Main Street were beginning to turn brilliant shades of orange and red. This was wonderful, Victoria said. Thank you for giving me the chance to explain everything. Thank you for the explanation, Marcus replied. And for the rescue at the auction, I'm not sure my ego would have survived walking off that stage empty-handed. Your ego would have been fine, Victoria said firmly. You're stronger than you think. Marcus Thompson, you always were. They stood there for a moment, two middle-aged adults who had found each other across 20 years and vastly different life paths. The connection was undeniable, but so was the complexity of their situation. I should probably mention, Victoria said, her voice carefully casual, that I'll be staying in Millbrook for a while. I'm taking a sabbatical from active management at Sterling Innovation, focusing on some personal projects. Oh, Marcus tried to keep his voice equally casual, though his heart rate had definitely quickened. I've been thinking about investing in some local businesses, maybe doing some community development work. Millbrook has a lot of potential, It's a good town, Marcus agreed. Full of good people. The best people, Victoria said, looking directly at him. As they parted ways, Victoria to her rental car, Marcus to his Honda, both of them carried the same thought: this was just the beginning. 2 weeks after their lunch at Giuseppe's, Marcus was elbow deep in the electrical panel at Millbrook Elementary when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Emma's school number, and his heart immediately jumped to worst-case scenarios. Mr. Thompson, this is Janet from the office. Emma's fine, but she asked me to call you. She forgot her permission slip for the field trip tomorrow, and she's quite upset about it. Marcus glanced at his watch. 2:30 p.m. He could finish this job in an hour, swing by the house to grab the permission slip, and still make it to school before Emma's after-school program ended. Tell her I'll be there before 4:00, he said. And Janet, thanks for calling instead of making her worry. The electrical panel at the elementary school was a nightmare, installed in the 1970s and upgraded piecemeal over the decades. Marcus had been working on it for 3 days, rewiring sections that were fire hazards and bringing the whole system up to code. It was exactly the kind of unglamorous but essential work that kept him busy and paid the bills. As he worked, he could hear the familiar sounds of an elementary school in the afternoon, children's voices echoing in the hallways, teachers calling out instructions, the occasional burst of laughter from a classroom. It was a good sound, the sound of a community nurturing its future. His phone buzzed with a text message. Victoria, how's your day going? They'd been texting regularly since their lunch, sharing small moments and observations. Victoria had a dry sense of humor that translated well to text, and Marcus found himself looking forward to her messages throughout the day. Wrestling with 1970s electrical work at Emma's school, he typed back. The previous electrician clearly believed in creative interpretation of safety codes. Her response came quickly. Sounds dangerous. Need backup. Just need more hours in the day, he replied, and maybe a time machine to go back and slap whoever wired this panel. He was surprised when, 20 minutes later, he heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. Victoria appeared in the doorway of the utility room, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Backup has arrived, she announced. And caffeine. Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully. You know, most billionaires don't make coffee runs for local electricians. Most billionaires miss out on the best conversations, Victoria replied, settling onto a step stool and surveying his work. This looks complicated. It's not complicated. It's just old and dangerous, Marcus said, returning to the tangle of wires. Whoever did the last upgrade took shortcuts. There are circuits here that shouldn't exist, loads that exceed capacity, and at least 3 violations of basic safety protocol. How long will it take to fix properly? Another 2 days, maybe 3. The school board wants it done fast and cheap, but fast and cheap is how you get fires. Victoria was quiet for a moment, watching him work. What would it cost to do it right? Not just fix the immediate problems, but upgrade the entire system to current standards. Marcus paused, surprised by the question. For the whole school, probably $50,000, maybe $60,000. New panels, updated wiring, proper circuit mapping, emergency backup systems. It's a big job, but it would be safe. It would be bulletproof. This building could run on that electrical system for the next 30 years without a problem. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. I'll talk to the school board. Victoria, you don't have to. Marcus, she interrupted gently. This is Emma's school. These are the children of people who've welcomed me into their community. If I can help make their school safer, why wouldn't I? Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Marcus Thompson. Mr. Thompson, this is Robert Chen from Millbrook Development Associates. I was hoping we could set up a meeting to discuss a business opportunity. Marcus frowned. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with your company. We're a development firm based in Hartford. We're working on a significant project in Millbrook, and we understand you operate a business in the area that might be affected. We'd like to discuss compensation and relocation options. The words hit Marcus like cold water. Relocation. Perhaps we could meet tomorrow morning. I think you'll find our offer very generous. Marcus glanced at Victoria, who was watching him with growing concern. Can you tell me more about this project? It's better discussed in person. Are you available at 9:00 a.m.? We could meet at your business location? Against his better judgment, Marcus agreed. After hanging up, he turned to Victoria, who was staring at her phone with an expression he couldn't read. Everything okay? He asked. Victoria looked up, and for the first time since he'd reconnected with her, she looked genuinely rattled. Marcus, I need to tell you something. But not here. Can we talk tonight? The seriousness in her voice made his stomach clench. Of course. Emma's at her friend's house for a sleepover. You could come by around 8. I'll be there, Victoria said, standing to leave. And Marcus, don't agree to anything at that meeting tomorrow until we've talked. After she left, Marcus found it difficult to concentrate on his work. The call from Millbrook Development Associates had come out of nowhere, and Victoria's reaction suggested she knew more than she was saying. He finished the day's work mechanically, his mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. That evening, Marcus was pacing his small living room when Victoria's rental car pulled into his driveway. Through the window, he could see her sitting in the driver's seat for a long moment, as if gathering courage. When she finally knocked on his door, her usual confidence was nowhere to be seen. Come in, he said, stepping aside. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Wine? Something stronger? Wine might be good, Victoria said, settling onto his couch. Marcus, I need to tell you something, and you're probably going to hate me for it. Marcus poured 2 glasses of the bottle of red wine he'd picked up on the way home, noting that his hands were steadier than his nerves. Try me. Victoria accepted the wine but didn't drink it, instead staring into the glass as if it held answers. The development company that called you today, they're connected to Sterling Innovation? Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. Connected how? We've been exploring a mixed-use development project in Millbrook. Retail, office space, high-end residential. The kind of project that could bring significant revenue and jobs to the area. She finally looked up at him. The proposed site includes the entire downtown commercial district, including my building, Marcus said, his voice flat. Including your building. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of betrayal and misunderstanding. Marcus set down his wine glass and walked to the window, staring out at the street where he'd grown up, where he'd built his life, where he'd planned to raise his daughter. So the auction, the lunch, all of this, he said without turning around. No! Victoria's voice was sharp, almost desperate. Marcus, no! I didn't know about you when we started exploring the project. The development team identified the properties, ran the feasibility studies, did all the preliminary work. I didn't even know the specific addresses until this afternoon. But you knew about the project when you bid on me. I knew about the project, yes, but I didn't know you would be affected by it. I didn't make the connection until that developer called you today. Marcus turned to face her. And now I'm going to kill the project. Just like that. Just like that. Victoria stood, moving toward him. Marcus, I've spent 20 years building my business, and I've made a lot of difficult decisions. But I won't destroy someone's life for profit. I won't destroy your life. What about the jobs, the revenue, the benefits to the community? There are other ways to invest in Millbrook. Ways that don't require tearing down what already works. Marcus studied her face, looking for deception or manipulation, but all he saw was sincerity and something that looked like fear. Fear that he would walk away, that this revelation would end whatever was growing between them. Your board of directors won't be happy, he said finally. My board of directors work for me, not the other way around, Victoria replied. And if they don't like it, they can find new jobs. Victoria, you don't have to sacrifice a business opportunity for me. We barely know each other. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of green in her brown eyes. Marcus, 20 years ago, you helped a struggling college student without asking for anything in return. You saw potential in someone everyone else overlooked. You changed the trajectory of my entire life. That was different. That was just, that was just kindness, Victoria finished. The same kindness you show when you volunteer with the fire department, when you take on jobs for elderly clients who can barely afford to pay you, when you spend 3 days making an elementary school safe instead of just fixing the immediate problem. She reached for his hands, her touch warm and steady. I'm not sacrificing a business opportunity for someone I barely know. I'm protecting someone I care about from a mistake I almost made. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a wall crumbling that he hadn't even realized he'd built. The whole town will hate you if this gets out. Kill the development project, and you'll be the outsider who came in and took away their economic future. Let me worry about that, Victoria said. I've been hated before. I've survived it. What about us? Marcus asked. If there is an us, Victoria's smile was soft but determined. There's definitely an us. If you want there to be. Marcus thought about everything that had happened in the past few weeks, the auction, the lunch, the easy conversations and growing connection. He thought about the young woman who had come into Electronics Plus 20 years ago, determined to learn and succeed despite every obstacle. He thought about the woman standing in his living room now, willing to sacrifice millions of dollars rather than hurt him. I want there to be, he said simply. Victoria's smile was radiant. Good. Because I've got some phone calls to make, and I'm going to need someone to help me figure out what this town actually needs. I might have some ideas about that, Marcus said, pulling her into his arms. I was hoping you would, Victoria murmured against his lips, just before he kissed her. Outside, the October wind rustled through the maple trees, and inside, two people who had found each other across decades and circumstances began to plan a future neither of them had seen coming. The Millbrook Diner was packed at 7:00 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, which wouldn't have been unusual except that half the town seemed to be there for the same reason. Word had spread quickly through the community grapevine the downtown development project was dead, killed by the very woman who had proposed it. Marcus sat in a corner booth, nursing his second cup of coffee and watching the reactions play out around him. At the counter, Bob Martinez, who owned the hardware store, was arguing with Susan Chen from the town council about missed opportunities in economic development. 3 tables over, elderly Mrs. Patterson was holding court, defending Victoria to anyone who would listen. She's done more for this town in 2 months than most people do in 2 years, Mrs. Patterson was saying, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had taught half the adults in the room when they were children. Fixed the playground equipment, donated new computers to the library, and now she's paying for a complete electrical upgrade at the school. You want to complain about that? Nobody's complaining about her generosity, Bob Martinez called out. We're talking about jobs, about bringing business to Main Street, about giving our kids a reason to stay in Millbrook after they graduate. What's wrong with the businesses we already have? Mrs. Patterson shot back. Marcus Thompson employs 3 people. Giuseppe's has been feeding this town for 30 years. The Henderson's bookstore has been here since before some of you were born. Why do we need to tear down what works to build something new? The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Victoria herself, who walked into the diner with the kind of quiet confidence that could stop a room mid-sentence. She wore jeans and a simple blue sweater, but somehow managed to look both approachable and formidable. Good morning, everyone, she said, addressing the room at large. I understand there were some questions about the development project. The diner fell silent. Marcus watched as Victoria scanned the room, making eye contact with various community members, her expression open and undefensive. Rather than let rumors and speculation fill in the blanks, she continued, I thought I should explain the situation directly. The downtown development project has been canceled. The decision was mine alone, and it's final. Ms. Sterling, Susan Chen said, half rising from her seat. The town council was very excited about the economic opportunities. I understand, Victoria interrupted gently, and I appreciate the council's enthusiasm. But after spending more time in Millbrook, I've realized that the development project would have changed the character of this town in ways that I don't think serve the community's best interests. So what do we get instead? Bob Martinez asked, his voice carrying a mixture of frustration and resignation. More of the same small-town stagnation while the rest of the world moves forward? Victoria's smile was patient. What you get instead is a $2 million investment in the businesses and infrastructure that already exist. What you get is a commitment to preserving what makes Millbrook special while finding ways to help it thrive. The number hit the room like a physical force. $2 million was more money than most of the people in the diner had ever contemplated, let alone seemed dedicated to their small town. What kind of investment? Susan Chen asked, her tone shifting from confrontational to curious. Infrastructure improvements, Victoria said, settling into an empty chair at the center of the room. The electrical grid downtown is 40 years old. The water main under Main Street has been patched so many times, it's more patch than pipe. The municipal building needs a new roof and a heating system that doesn't require prayer to function. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the diner. Everyone in town was familiar with the infrastructure problems that had been deferred for years due to budget constraints. Beyond that, Victoria continued, I'd like to establish a small business development fund, low-interest loans for local entrepreneurs, grants for existing businesses that want to expand, support for marketing and technology upgrades. And what do you get out of it? Bob Martinez asked, suspicion still evident in his voice. Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering the question. I get to live in a community that I'm proud to be part of. I get to see my investment dollars creating opportunities for people I care about. And I get to prove that sometimes the best way to build something new is to strengthen what already exists. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. That's what I've been trying to tell you all. Sometimes the best changes are the ones that honor what came before. The conversation continued for another hour, with Victoria fielding questions about timelines, selection processes, and oversight. Marcus found himself impressed by her knowledge of the town's needs and her obvious respect for the community's input. This wasn't a wealthy outsider dictating terms. This was someone who had done her homework and genuinely wanted to help. As the crowd began to disperse, people returning to their morning routines, Victoria made her way over to Marcus's booth. How do you think that went? She asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Better than you probably expected, Marcus said, though Bob Martinez is still skeptical. Bob Martinez should be skeptical. He's been watching out for this town's interests for 20 years. I'd be worried if he just rolled over and accepted everything I said. You really have $2 million to invest in Millbrook, Victoria laughed. Marcus, I have considerably more than $2 million to invest in Millbrook. The question is whether the town is ready to think big about its future. What do you mean? I mean that Millbrook has advantages that most small towns would kill for. It's an hour from Hartford, 2 hours from New York, surrounded by beautiful countryside, and full of talented people who've chosen to make their lives here. With the right investments, this could be a model for sustainable small-town development. Marcus studied her face, seeing the excitement and vision there. You're serious about this. This isn't just about us, or about guilt over the development project. It's about us, Victoria said, but it's also about building something meaningful. I've spent 20 years creating shareholder value and stock options. I want to spend the next 20 years creating something that actually improves people's lives, even if it means giving up the corporate world, especially if it means giving up the corporate world. Victoria reached across the table to take his hand. Marcus, I've been successful by every measure that matters to Wall Street, but I've never been happy. Not until I came back to Millbrook. Not until I found you again. The sincerity in her voice took his breath away. Victoria, I know it's fast, she said quickly. I know we're still figuring this out. But I also know that some things are worth taking risks for. Before Marcus could respond, Emma burst through the diner door, her backpack bouncing as she rushed toward their table. Dad, Victoria, I heard about the money for the town, and I think it's awesome. And can I help decide how to spend it? Because I have a lot of ideas about what Millbrook needs. Emma's enthusiasm was infectious, and both adults found themselves laughing at her breathless excitement. Slow down, kiddo, Marcus said, pulling out a chair for his daughter. What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at school? Early dismissal for teacher meetings, Emma said, settling into her chair and looking expectantly at Victoria. So can I help? I've been thinking about this town my whole life, and I have ideas. I'd love to hear your ideas, Victoria said seriously. What does Millbrook need? A real playground, Emma said immediately. The one we have is okay, but it's old and kind of boring. And we need a place where teenagers can hang out that isn't just the parking lot at the grocery store. Maybe a community center with games and activities and stuff. Those are excellent suggestions, Victoria said. What else? Better internet, Emma continued, warming to her subject. Half my friends can't do their homework online because their internet is too slow. And we need more activities for families. Like, why don't we have a movie theater, or a bowling alley, or even just a place where people can hear live music? Marcus watched the interaction between his daughter and Victoria, seeing how naturally they connected. Emma's enthusiasm was met with genuine interest, and Victoria's questions encouraged more detailed thinking about the town's needs. Emma, Victoria said after listening to several more suggestions, would you be interested in being part of a youth advisory committee? I think any investment in Millbrook should include input from the people who are going to inherit whatever we build. Emma's eyes went wide. Really, officially? Like, officially, with meetings and agendas and everything? That would be amazing. Can I tell my friends? You can tell your friends that we're looking for young people who care about Millbrook's future and want to help shape it. As Emma launched into a detailed explanation of which of her classmates would be perfect for the committee, Marcus felt something settle in his chest. This was what happiness looked like, his daughter excited about the future. A woman he was falling in love with who genuinely cared about his community, and a sense that the life he'd built in Millbrook was just the beginning of something larger. So, he said when Emma paused for breath, what's the first project? Victoria smiled. The electrical upgrade at the school. We start there, and we build out from there. And then, Emma asked, and then we see what's possible when a community decides to invest in itself, Victoria replied. Outside the diner, the October sun was breaking through the morning clouds, casting everything in golden light. Inside, three people who had found each other across different circumstances and generations began to plan a future that none of them could have imagined just a few weeks before. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, something that honored the past while building toward a future worth believing in. The boardroom at Sterling Innovations' Hartford headquarters was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the Connecticut River, while a massive mahogany table dominated the center of the room. The 12 members of the board of directors sat in high-back leather chairs, their expressions ranging from concerned to openly hostile. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her posture calm despite the tension crackling through the air. She wore a sharp business suit, her hair pulled back in the severe style that had become her trademark in corporate settings. But anyone who knew her well would have noticed the difference in her eyes, a certainty that hadn't been there before. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, said James Crawford, the board's longest-serving member and Victoria's most vocal critic. You want to abandon a $200 million development project to invest $2 million in a small town that most people have never heard of. That's correct, Victoria replied evenly. And you want to take a sabbatical from active management to focus on what you're calling community development work. Also correct, Crawford leaned forward, his voice taking on the patronizing tone that had made him countless enemies over his 30-year career. Victoria, I've known you since you were a junior analyst. You've never made a decision this irrational. What's really going on here? What's going on, James? Is that I'm remembering why I started this company in the first place? It wasn't to maximize shareholder value or to see how many zeros I could add to my net worth. It was to build something meaningful. With all due respect, interrupted Sarah Kim, the board's newest member. Meaningful doesn't pay dividends. We have responsibilities to our investors, our employees, our employees, Victoria said, cutting her off, most of whom live in communities that have been hollowed out by exactly the kind of development we were planning for Millbrook. Our investors, who have seen their portfolios grow by 400% since I took over as CEO. I think both groups can afford to have me pursue a project that might actually improve people's lives instead of just their bank accounts. The room fell silent. Victoria had never spoken to the board with such bluntness, had never challenged their assumptions so directly. For 10 years, she had been the perfect CEO, brilliant, driven, completely focused on growth and profitability. This version of Victoria Sterling was unfamiliar territory. There's something else, said Michael Torres, the board's financial expert. We've heard rumors about your personal involvement with someone in this town. Is this business decision being influenced by a romantic relationship? Victoria's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. My personal life is not a topic for board discussion. It is if it's affecting your judgment, Torres pressed. If you're making a $200 million decision based on Michael, Victoria's voice was soft, but it carried a warning that made Torres immediately stop talking. I'm going to give you one opportunity to rephrase that question in a way that doesn't insult my intelligence or my integrity. The boardroom was completely silent. In the distance, they could hear the muted sounds of traffic and construction, the city continuing its relentless pace outside their climate-controlled sanctuary. What I think Michael is trying to ask, Crawford said carefully, is whether you've considered all the factors that might be influencing this decision. Sometimes, when we're personally invested in a situation, we can lose perspective. I appreciate the concern, Victoria said, but I've never had more perspective than I do right now. For 20 years, I've been building a company that exists primarily to generate wealth for people who already have more money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes. The Millbrook Project is an opportunity to do something different, something that actually matters. And if it fails, asked Jennifer Walsh, the board's governance expert, if your $2 million investment doesn't generate the outcomes you're hoping for, then I'll have spent $2 million trying to improve a community instead of spending $200 million destroying one. I can live with that failure. But can the company live with it? Crawford asked. Victoria, you're not just the CEO of Sterling Innovation. You're the face of this company, the vision behind our growth strategy. If you step back from active management to play small-town philanthropist, what message does that send to our clients, our competitors, our industry partners? Victoria stood, walking to the window and looking out at the city skyline. Hartford wasn't New York or San Francisco, but it was still a long way from the tree-lined streets and community diners of Millbrook. The contrast felt sharper now than it ever had before. It sends the message that we're a company with values beyond profit maximization, she said without turning around. It sends the message that we understand success isn't just about how much money we make, but about how we make that money and what we do with it afterward. That's a lovely sentiment, Crawford said, but it's not a business strategy. Victoria turned back to face the board. Actually, James, it's the only business strategy that makes sense anymore. The old model, extract maximum value from every opportunity, regardless of the long-term consequences, is dying. Consumers want to do business with companies that align with their values. Employees want to work for organizations that stand for something beyond quarterly earnings. Even investors are starting to care about environmental, social, and governance factors. So you're saying this is about corporate responsibility? Sarah Kim asked. I'm saying this is about corporate evolution. Sterling Innovation can continue to be another tech company that makes rich people richer, or it can become something more, something that proves business success and social impact aren't mutually exclusive. And if the board doesn't support this direction, Crawford asked. Victoria returned to her seat, her expression serene. Then you have a decision to make. You can support a CEO who wants to expand the company's mission and explore new ways to create value. Or you can find a new CEO who'll stick to the old playbook. The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge. Crawford exchanged glances with several other board members, clearly calculating the implications of Victoria's position. Victoria, he said finally, you've been incredibly successful. You've built this company into an industry leader. No one questions your business acumen or your value to sterling innovation. But this seems like such a dramatic departure. So, 20 years ago, Victoria said quietly, I was a broke college student trying to nurse a failing laptop through my senior year. A small-town electrician spent 3 Saturday afternoons teaching me how to troubleshoot hardware problems. He wouldn't let me pay him, said it was just part of the service. That laptop got me through my thesis, through my first job applications, through the early days of my first startup. She paused, seeing the surprise on several faces around the table. Every success I've had since then can be traced back to that kindness, not because of the technical knowledge, though that was valuable, but because someone saw potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself. Because someone invested in my future without expecting anything in return. And this electrician, Torres said slowly, he's the person you're involved with in Millbrook. His name is Marcus Thompson. He's a good man, a devoted father, and someone who makes his community better just by being part of it. And yes, I care about him, but this isn't about him. This is about me finally understanding what I want to do with the success he helped make possible. The board members looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Crawford spoke. What exactly are you proposing? In concrete terms, I want to establish a new division within Sterling Innovation focused on sustainable community development. I want to take a 2-year sabbatical from day-to-day operations to develop the model, using Millbrook as a pilot program. I want to prove that we can create economic opportunity without destroying the things that make communities worth living in. And if it works, we scale it. We find other small towns and communities that could benefit from thoughtful investment and support. We become the company that figures out how to do development right. And if it doesn't work, Victoria smiled, if it doesn't work, I'll have spent 2 years of my life trying to make the world a little bit better. I can't think of a better use of time or money. The vote, when it came, was closer than Crawford had expected. 7 members supported Victoria's proposal, 5 opposed it. It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but it was enough. As the board members filed out of the room, Crawford lingered behind. Victoria, he said, I hope you know what you're doing. I hope so too, James. But for the first time in 20 years, I'm doing something because it feels right, not because it's the safe choice. And this man, this Marcus Thompson, he's worth all of this. Victoria considered the question seriously. He's worth a lot, but this isn't just about him. This is about the person I want to be, the life I want to live, the legacy I want to leave. And if it doesn't work out, the relationship, the community project, any of it, then at least I'll know I tried to build something meaningful instead of just something profitable. An hour later, Victoria was driving north on I-91, leaving Hartford behind for the tree-lined streets of Millbrook. Her phone rang just as she passed the exit for the state capitol. How did it go? Marcus's voice was warm and concerned. I'm now officially on sabbatical, Victoria said. The board approved the Community Development Initiative, with some grumbling but no outright rebellion. And how do you feel? Victoria thought about it as she drove through the Connecticut countryside, watching the landscape change from urban to suburban to rural. Terrified, she said finally, and exhilarated, and completely certain that I'm doing the right thing. Emma wants to know if you're coming to dinner tonight. She's made a list of 17 things she thinks the Youth Advisory Committee should tackle first. 17. That's very specific. She's very thorough. Takes after her old man. Victoria laughed. Tell her I'll be there. And Marcus. Yeah. Thank you. For 20 years ago. For the auction, for helping me remember who I want to be. Thank you for taking the risk, Marcus replied. On all of it. As Victoria drove toward Millbrook, toward a life she was still learning to imagine, she thought about the choices that had brought her to this moment. The scared college student who had walked into Electronics Plus. The ambitious young woman who had moved to California with $500 and a dream. The successful CEO who had built an empire but lost herself in the process. And now, the middle-aged woman who was ready to start over, to build something new from the foundation of something true. The sun was setting as she reached the Millbrook town limits, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere ahead, Marcus and Emma were waiting for her to join them for dinner. Somewhere behind, the corporate world was continuing its relentless pace without her. For the first time in 20 years, Victoria Sterling was exactly where she belonged. The autumn light in Millbrook had a different quality now, softer somehow, as if the town itself had settled into a more comfortable version of itself. Marcus stood in front of the newly renovated community center, watching Emma and her friends hang streamers for the first annual Millbrook Innovation Festival. "Dad, can you reach the high corner?" Emma called out, pointing to a spot near the ceiling where a banner had come loose. "I think that's what ladders are for, kiddo," Marcus replied, but he was already moving toward the supply closet. Some things never changed. He was still the guy people called when things needed fixing. The community center had been the first major project completed with Victoria's investment fund. What had once been a crumbling 1960s building had been transformed into a modern, multi-purpose space that hosted everything from town meetings to yoga classes to Emma's youth advisory committee sessions. The Innovation Festival had been Emma's idea, a way to showcase the various projects that had emerged from the Community Development Initiative over the past year. Local artists would display their work, small business owners would demonstrate their crafts, and several regional tech companies would present on sustainable development practices. "It's bigger than I expected," Victoria said, appearing at Marcus's side with her usual quiet grace. She wore jeans and a Millbrook Community Development t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than her 53 years. "Emma's been promoting it at school, on social media, and to anyone who'll listen," Marcus replied. "I think half of Connecticut is planning to show up." Good, that was the point. The past year had been a whirlwind of activity and change. The infrastructure improvements had been completed ahead of schedule. New electrical systems, updated water mains, and a municipal building that no longer required prayer to maintain comfortable temperatures. The Small Business Development Fund had provided loans and grants to 18 local entrepreneurs. From Giuseppe's son, who wanted to expand the restaurant to include catering, to Sarah Chen's daughter, who had started a digital marketing consultancy. Most importantly, the Youth Advisory Committee had become a model for other communities throughout New England. Emma and her friends had been invited to speak at conferences, and their recommendations had influenced everything from playground design to high-speed internet infrastructure. "How are you feeling about the anniversary?" Victoria asked, slipping her hand into his. They'd been married for 6 months now, a small ceremony in the community center with half the town in attendance. Emma had been Victoria's maid of honor, and her speech had brought tears to everyone's eyes. The wedding had been covered by several business magazines, curious about the billionaire CEO who had walked away from corporate life for love and small-town development work. "Good," Marcus said, squeezing her hand. "A little overwhelmed by how much has changed, but good. Any regrets? About which part, marrying you, becoming a stepfather to half the town's youth initiatives, or having my wife's business meetings covered by the Wall Street Journal?" Victoria laughed. "Any of it. All of it." Marcus considered the question seriously. The past year had been the most complicated of his life. Victoria's commitment to Millbrook had attracted national attention, and their relationship had been scrutinized by media outlets fascinated by the story of the billionaire and the electrician. Emma had handled the attention better than he had, treating reporters like particularly dense adults who needed basic concepts explained slowly. But the complications had been worth it. Victoria had brought more than money to Millbrook. She'd brought vision, connections, and a deep understanding of how to build sustainable change. The town was thriving in ways that preserved its character while creating new opportunities. "No regrets," he said finally. "Though I still think it's weird that people want to interview me about economic development." "You're the one with the practical experience," Victoria pointed out. "I know how to build companies. You know how to build communities. We make a good team. The best team." The festival officially opened at noon, and by 12:30 the community center was packed with visitors from across the region. Marcus found himself giving tours of the infrastructure improvements, explaining how smart electrical systems could be implemented in small towns, and answering questions about sustainable development practices. Victoria was in her element, moving through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who had found her calling. She spoke with entrepreneurs about their businesses, listened to teenagers explain their community projects, and discussed the Millbrook model with delegation from 3 other Connecticut towns interested in replicating the approach. "Mrs. Thompson," said a reporter from the Hartford Courant, "can you tell us about the national expansion plans for the Community Development Initiative?" Victoria smiled at the title. She'd kept her name professionally, but had legally become Victoria Sterling Thompson, a compromise that satisfied both her business identity and her desire to be part of Marcus's family. "We're being very careful about expansion," she replied. "The goal isn't to scale quickly, but to scale thoughtfully. Each community has its own character, its own needs, its own assets. What worked in Millbrook might not work elsewhere without significant adaptation. But you have received interest from other communities. Tremendous interest. We're currently working with 5 other towns in New England, and we've had inquiries from communities across the country. The key is finding places where there's genuine community leadership and a willingness to think long-term. And your former colleagues at Sterling Innovation, what do they think about your career change?" Victoria's smile was diplomatic. "They think I've lost my mind, but our community development division has exceeded every performance metric we set, and we're proving that sustainable development can be both profitable and socially beneficial." Some of them are starting to come around. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself watching Emma work the crowd with the confidence of someone who had grown up believing her voice mattered. She led tours of the youth center, explained the community garden project, and spoke knowledgeably about municipal broadband initiatives. At 13, she was already a more effective advocate for Millbrook than most adults. "She's remarkable," said Dr. Sarah Kim, who had driven up from Hartford for the festival. Kim had left the Sterling Innovation Board 6 months ago to join the Community Development Initiative as its Director of Strategic Partnerships. "She is," Marcus agreed. "Sometimes I think she's going to be running this place by the time she's 18. She might be. The Youth Advisory Committee has been our most successful innovation. Half the inquiries we get from other communities are specifically about replicating that model." Victoria's idea. Actually, Emma's idea. Victoria just had the wisdom to take it seriously. As the sun began to set, the festival moved into its evening phase. Local musicians performed on the outdoor stage. Food trucks lined the street, and families spread blankets on the community center lawn. It felt like a small-town celebration, but with an energy and diversity that spoke to Millbrook's evolution. Marcus found Victoria sitting on the front steps of the community center, taking a rare moment of quiet amid the celebration. "Tired?" he asked, settling beside her. "Happy," she replied. "I was just thinking about that night at the auction, when I raised my paddle and had no idea what I was doing. Best impulse decision you ever made." "Second best," Victoria said, leaning against his shoulder. "The best was deciding to stay." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their neighbors and friends enjoy the festival. Emma was across the lawn, engaged in an animated conversation with a group of teenagers from other towns who had come to learn about the Youth Advisory Committee model. "What do you think?" Victoria asked. "Ready for year 2? Marcus thought about the question. The past year had been full of challenges, adapting to life in the public eye, learning to navigate the complex world of community development, building a marriage while building a movement, but it had also been full of purpose and meaning in ways he hadn't expected. "I think," he said finally, "that we're just getting started." Victoria smiled. "Good, because I have some ideas about what we could do next." "Of course you do. Regional coordination, sustainable tourism, maybe a fellowship program for young people interested in community development work." Marcus laughed. "You know, most people would be satisfied with transforming one small town." "Most people," Victoria said, "aren't married to Marcus Thompson." As the evening deepened and the festival began to wind down, Marcus reflected on the strange mathematics of fate that had brought them to this moment. A charity auction where no one bid on a small-town electrician, a billionaire who saw something worth saving, a community that was willing to believe in change, and at the center of it all, the simple truth that had started everything: sometimes the best way to build something new is to strengthen what already exists. The last of the visitors headed home, and the cleanup began. But as Marcus looked around at the thriving community center, the engaged young people, the neighbors working together to restore their town to its evening quiet, he knew that the real work was just beginning. Millbrook had become proof that small towns could evolve without losing their souls. That development could be both profitable and humane. That love for a person, for a community, for a vision of what was possible, could be the foundation for lasting change. In the distance, Emma was directing the youth committee's cleanup efforts with the efficiency of a seasoned project manager. Victoria was helping elderly Mrs. Patterson to her car, listening patiently to her suggestions for next year's festival. The community center glowed with warm light, ready to host whatever came next. Marcus smiled, picked up a trash bag, and went to help his family clean up after another successful day in the life they'd built together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that sometimes the best investments are the ones that can't be measured in dollars alone. But tonight, in the soft October evening in Millbrook, Connecticut, three people who had found each other across time and circumstance were exactly where they belonged, building something worth keeping for the next generation to inherit. Sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with the smallest acts of courage. A single father stepped onto a stage where he didn't belong, risking humiliation for his daughter's school. A successful woman walked away from everything she'd built to protect a community she'd only just discovered. A 12-year-old girl believed that love could bridge any gap and refused to let the adults in her life settle for less than they deserved. What started as charity auction became something far more valuable: proof that authentic connection still matters in a world obsessed with image. That small towns aren't stepping stones to somewhere better, but destinations worth fighting for. That sometimes the person who saves you is someone you helped long ago, when kindness was just second nature. The boardroom lost a CEO, but Millbrook gained a champion. Corporate shareholders lost a profit margin, but a community gained its future. And two people who thought their best days were behind them discovered that the most meaningful chapters are often written later in life. In the end, the question isn't whether you're worthy of someone's attention, it's whether you're brave enough to believe that you are. Some risks are worth taking, some hands are worth raising,